Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 42, recorded July 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we speak with a Star Trek fan. We learn their story, and we try to figure out why Star Trek matters to them, to you, and to all of us. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 42. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Warning! As we record this, we are early in Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the often judgy, rarely jokey, but never jealous M5 Multitronic Unit. Greet the listeners, M5.
M5 ready.
All right, let's see the announcements, M5.
News available.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent Star Trek podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. And if you're active on the social medias, your mentions, tweets, retweets, sharing of various kinds helps other Trek fans find our little show. So why not spread the love? There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. In this one, there was a particular lengthy diatribe I go on about the sports ball, among a couple of other things, so enjoy them or not, as you choose. Let's talk about the Kobayashi Maru poll feedback for episode 40 with Kimberly Lawler. Worst syndrome, Bandai syndrome, or Kalanora syndrome. Kim said Bandai, and the Twitter people agreed by 60 to 40%. What's for lunch? Ferengi slug steaks or Cardassian taskbar eggs? Taskbar eggs was the choice of both my guest and all of you by a hard-boiled 83 to 17%. You've got to get somewhere in a hurry. Transit, divorce space, or Cardassian space? Kim and all of you were aligned by selecting Cardassian space by an 86 to 14% margin. If you were in the episode Attached, to whom would you be attached? Jean-Luc Picard or Bev Crusher? Kim picked Picard, but you, dear listeners, selected Bev by a crushing 67 to 33%. And finally, 4-shift duty rotation or 3. Kim picked 3, and all of you also incorrectly voted for the clearly inferior 3-shift rotation by 67 to 33%. I will add you all to the 4th shift as penance. As always, after each episode drops, I will tweet out this episode's questions on Twitter, and you can have your say if you follow me there. That's it for messages and communiques. Let's move on. M5, let's run the intelligence profile for this week's guest, and let's start the show.
M5 complies.
His favorite character is the Cisco. His favorite ship is the Voyager, but that Discovery version of the Enterprise is sneaking up on it. He's really fond of those wily Cardassians and is a huge fan of Damar. You can find him on the Twitter at CallMeDJM. He's from Motor City, Detroit, Michigan, in North America Earth, in Sector 001. It's David Majors. Welcome, David, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Hello, John. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, Trek Profiles listeners and fans.
David, it is time for question 1. Are you a Star Trek fan? Will you confess?
I'm sorry, what?
Will you confess to being a Star Trek fan?
Wait, I thought this was about Rocky and Bullwinkle. What?
Will you confess to fandom of Star Trek? Natasha, get the torture tools.
It's okay, I guess. It's okay. It's all right.
You're only going to get the Natasha and Boris impersonation once in a lifetime here on Trek Profiles. That's all I'm going to say.
You're welcome, everybody.
I'm going to say one more thing. Moose and squirrel. Okay, let's move on. So you are a Star Trek fan, David. That is outstanding. So tell me, do you have a particular moment in your life when you remember Star Trek entering it, or is it something that's always been with you?
Star Trek has really been a part of my entire life. I think my earliest memory might be the first run of The Next Generation. I do very vividly remember watching The Best of Both Worlds with my mother as a child. I was, maybe no more than 6 or 7 years old, but I definitely remember we have engaged the Borg. I vividly remember that. Captain Shelby, Commander Shelby, Riker taking over the ship, Locutus. As a child, I remember that very vividly, and Star Trek has been a part of my life, at least for that long. My mother was of the generation that grew up with the original series. My sister and my mother are both devoted fans of Lieutenant Uhura, and yes, Star Trek, for as long as I can remember, has always been there.
It's funny, you mentioned Best of Both Worlds, and I think Shelby is in my list of characters that I consider one of the top mysteries of Star Trek. So one of those is Whatever Happened to Mistral from Carbon Creek, and one of those is What's Shelby Up To? Like, I want to know what happened to her. I thought she was fantastic. And
wink,
I
wink,
want to know
Alex Kurtzman. Wink, wink.
Free story advice, a la Trek Profiles. So that's fantastic. Now, the M5 did some research here, and it told me to ask you about your time in the Air Force and Star Trek. So it sounds like there's a story here that I want to know about. So tell me, what's the Venn diagram of serving in the Air Force and Star Trek for you, David?
Well, it really goes back to when I was in my first year or so on active duty. And despite my job training in IT, the base that I was on put me on security forces duty. For any length of time, I was kind of stuck on guard duty, whether it was at the gate of a base or somewhere else. And, well, it sucked. It sucked a lot. But one thing that was positive about this was the shift that I was on. It was from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And during the daytime, this would have been around 2003, 2004, Spike TV, the cable network, would air reruns of The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And it gave me an opportunity to get reacquainted with my childhood love, my first fandom, with all of the fandoms that I've dabbled in and experimented over my life. Star Trek was the first. And it allowed me to get reacquainted with The Next Generation and rediscover Deep Space Nine. I had already watched all of them by then, but it was nice to get reintroduced, and it was a good escape from that particular period.
So do you feel like your fandom had waned a little bit, and then just due to the vagaries of your scheduling, you got reinvigorated because it happened to be on?
I think that's a good way to put it, because I enjoyed Voyager, because I've pretty much watched all of the classic Trek and TNG, DS9, and Voyager during their original runs. But just over my teens, I got interested in other things. And while Star Trek was always there, I just kind of drifted in other directions. And when Enterprise ended, it kind of went dormant for a while. And I discovered anime and my enjoyment of pro wrestling, and all of these other fandoms and interests kind of took over until we got the current era of Star Trek, the Silver Age, I would say.
It's funny that you bring up being in the Air Force. I've talked about the show many times that I was in the Navy, so I'm a veteran too. And one of the things that people don't appreciate sometimes who are not in the service is that you can train for years to do a certain job, and then you get your assignment to where you're actually going to be, your command, your ship, your base, whatever it is, and they can put you into anything they feel like. And, imagine like Scotty showing up as like the most gung-ho engineer in all Starfleet, right? Like he just wants to like lay his hands on the warp engines. And they're like, yeah, you need to go to navigation. So take off that red shirt and put on a gold shirt and, go up there and be a navigator, which is I the only time I think this really happened in Star Trek, I think it was in one of the Kelvin movies when they sent Chekhov down into engineering and Chris Pine tells him, put on a red shirt and get down to engineering, right? And I think, man, that was so true. That is literally how it happened.
That's the life. Thankfully, it was only 90 days, and I was counting every one of them.
So you sound like in your previous answer that you haven't seen all of Star Trek. What are you missing thus far?
I think the only thing that I'm really missing that I haven't actually watched at all is the animated series. The movies of the TOS era, I've watched all of them at least once, and on Promenade Merchants, wink wink, plug plug, Heather and I, my co-host Heather Kirby, we're kind of doing a recap. We're rewatching those. I've getting reacquainted with them. I've watched all of the original series, TNG, DS9, Voyager. I finally caught up on all of Enterprise very recently. I only watched a little bit of it in its first run. And Discovery, I've caught up on. I watched Discovery and Picard as they were airing. I think at this point, it's really only the animated series, which I should probably get started on as Lower Decks is about to start.
Yeah, you can get through animated series really quick. I mean, they're only like 20-something minutes an episode, so you can cut through like 3 a night if you really wanted to, pretty easily. What's interesting, though, and I'll just warn you about this, is that it's surprising how much of animated series that the current regime has actually put into 21st Century Trek. So when you're looking at Discovery and the Picard show, there's all these little references to animated series in there. So there was always a debate about whether or not it was considered canonical, and Roddenberry had his own opinions on that. But for sure, the current generation is like, nope, it's a thing.
It's all canon.
That's right. It's all canon. That's right.
All so Star Trek is Star Trek.
So one of the episodes, and I'm not going to spoil anything except to say that there is a giant 50-foot Spock on a planet somewhere. So that's all I'm going to say. It's canon, people. It was there. Have you done a disciplined rewatch when you were catching up on these shows? I mean, did you like sit down like with a streaming service and go through each and every episode, or did you just kind of dive in or watch it in syndication? What I'm trying to figure out here, David, is are you sure you've seen all the episodes or not?
This is something that I commit myself to, and it's exactly the opposite. With everything that I'm into, and people always recommend, where should I start? I always tell people, whether it's Star Trek or anything else, just do one episode at a time. I'm not a binge watcher by any means, unless it's something that really, really grabs me. Over the years, with the dormancy of the Star Trek franchise, I was able to get caught up. I would do with Enterprise and with Voyager, just one day I remember, I feel like watching Star Trek Voyager. I haven't watched it in a while. And I just said to myself, I'll do an episode a day. And I just made my way through it. And then when it was done, I think it's time I do Enterprise. And I just felt like sticking to an episode a day. And that's something that I've always believed, especially when it comes to Star Trek. You don't have to have the entire meal in one sitting. You can do an episode or two a day, and I think that gives, in my opinion, a more satisfying experience if you spread it out over time. You have something to look forward to doing every day, and there's less pressure on yourself. There's more enjoyment. You can do it on your time. And yes, I can say, thanks to Netflix over the years, I've watched every episode that there would be to watch, except the animated series.
Groovy. So one of the things you had mentioned was that it was a comfort thing for you when you were a kid watching TNG with your mom. So was that sort of like the premier TV bonding moment you had with mom?
Yeah, it was. That was our real mother-son time. It was TNG and DS9. The Next Generation was the show that our family, my mom, my sister, and I all loved. And also DS9 especially, because of Benjamin Sisko and Jake Sisko and their close father-son relationship, to which I eventually grew with my father, because he raised me through most of my childhood later on. That close father-son bond really was significant. But going back to TNG, that was something that really started with my mother. It's the fond memories I have of her. A lot of them are Star Trek based. It was arguing over Q because I thought Q was a jerk and she thought Q was funny. That hasn't changed.
And so not a fan of Q on the Star Trek, huh?
I'll say that when Benjamin Sisko punched him, I felt pretty justified about it.
I think
it was like, finally, somebody shut him up. God.
Yeah, I think it was a great moment in Deep Space Nine merely to contrast how Sisko dealt with him versus how Picard dealt with him, right? It's one of those moments you look at and you're like, yeah, Picard would never have done that, right? He would have had his own ways of showing agitation or disgust with Q, but not that.
Let's not forget, Q punched first. Mm-hmm. You watch the clip, Q hit him first. And Q thought it was a good idea to try and throw hands with a half human, half wormhole alien, and that's what he got for it.
Oh, absolutely. It was totally justified, and I was more than happy to see him get punched in the face. In fact, I wish he would have done it again, because I think that was a very helpful calibration for Q in understanding how to relate to humans.
Only takes so much.
So these days, how are you watching Star Trek, David? Do you watch it on a device, on a TV, big screen, on your phone? How do you watch it?
I have Netflix on my PlayStation 4 and a nice little television set that's just off screen here for the video viewers, none of you. And when I'm feeling like it, it'll just when the mood strikes. Also, I will give a quick shout out to all Star Trek on the Heroes and Icons network. I think they provide a great service of what I like to call playing the classics. So I want to give a shout out to all Star Trek. And it for people out there that have a hard time picking an episode, you don't have to with all Star Trek. If you have that channel, it'll just be from the original series to Enterprise all night, and you don't even have to think about it.
Oh, it's great. I don't get that channel where I am. One of the things I always recommend to my listeners is I had Dr. Mohammed Noor on the show. I think it was one of the very earliest episodes of the show, and he actually built a random Star Trek episode picker that we have a link to in the show notes for his episode. And so if you ever need to pick an episode at random, you can just go there. It's on his website for free. Anyone can access it and just say, yeah, I want an episode. And you can even say, don't show me a Voyager episode. And it'll just pick from whatever, so you can pick whatever you like and it'll show you an episode. So that's always a handy little thing. And I appreciated that. Someday I look forward to using that, but I got to finish my Enterprise watch through. And then I'll just start randomly watching episodes and movies. Are you a collector of anything, David, Star Trek related?
Not really. I've never been a collector of anything. I've spent most of my life living in apartments, and the question of space for things has just never really been an issue. I've just never had that real longing to collect things. Maybe I've thought about a Gundam model here and there because that's a thing I'm into, but not entirely. I've never been a collector. I'm only recently starting to get into the deadly mystical art of cosplay. So it's really just always been a matter of space for me. Collecting, never been a thing.
So you mentioned cosplay. Talk to me. What are we doing? Have we seen any David Majors cosplay going on, or is this something that's currently in the work?
You probably have. I am someone that traverses many fandoms and many realms across the multiverse of nerdom. I've done a cosplay of Broken Matt Hardy, the pro wrestler, in his Broken Brilliance character. I've done a few Star Trek cosplays, which I even got a compliment from Doug Jones about, in my, what I like to call my disco suit from Star Trek Discovery. And I might have something from Star Trek Picard lined up if I get to go to a convention again sometime in the future, because I'm picking Discovery and I'm picking Picard because I like to stay current. I like to look forward and keep with what's fresh and what's new.
That's great. So it sounds like it's mostly uniforms that you're doing.
Yes. My sister is the Klingon in the family.
Oh, fantastic. So I think we need to get a picture of you and her together doing some cosplay, and I think you need to tweet that.
I would love that idea. If my sister Maymuna listens to this podcast, I think we need to do a Federation Klingon cosplay thing. I think that needs to happen. Thank you, John. Great idea.
So if it helps that she's in the Klingon mode, then, I give her the hand, right, in the Klingon way, and I challenge, right, that this cosplay must happen.
Maimuna, you have been challenged.
Do you watch Star Trek with your sister?
We will watch all Star Trek sometimes at the same time, where she'll be at her house and I'll be at mine, and we'll text back and forth or we'll tweet back and forth, and that has happened. There is some sibling trekkery going on.
Oh, that's wonderful and beautiful. And
that's a good podcast name, Sibling Trekkery.
Why
that's
not?
Good.
Right?
That's good. Don't steal it.
I was online in a forum for podcasters unrelated to Star Trek, and some other Star Trek podcaster who was just getting started was asking questions, and I was like, "Hey, I got some advice for you. Since you're asking." And one of the things I said was, "Look, man, there is a huge fat tail of Star Trek podcasting. So if you can find some niche out there that you think you can scratch with your show, go for it. You should do it. So why not, man? Bring it." Okay, so one of the things we've talked about is your collections. We've talked about cosplay. You sent me some pictures of yourself at a Star Trek convention, it looked like, or some kind of sci-fi convention. So tell me, how long have you been going to sci-fi conventions, or is it the particular subset of Star Trek conventions? Tell me about that.
Those pictures that I sent you were from Motor City Comic Con in 2018 in my Discovery cosplay. I really spent, I like to say, I went through an experimental phase, John, where I was really into anime. And I've gone to a lot of anime conventions. Some of these anime conventions also had a pretty significant Star Trek fandom as well. And that really helped reinvigorate my Star Trek fandom. It was like, okay, there are still people that love Star Trek and have a place in their heart for Star Trek. And that's when I realized I saw that a lot of them were just TNG era uniforms. And I said to myself, why don't I do something different? Why don't I go a little bit outside the box? And by that time, Discovery was in its first season, and I thought, why don't I do a Discovery cosplay? And at a few of the conventions in the Midwest, I was, by all accounts, the first person around with a Star Trek Discovery cosplay. And that was pretty cool, because I like to live in the now. I like to enjoy the presence of all of my fandoms.
First of all, I feel like you should do an anime Star Trek cosplay crossover. I feel like that's lurking in the penumbras of this conversation, David, and I feel like that's something you should think about.
I've given this a lot of thought, Sean, and when I did the anime podcast of some sort, my anime pod, the question of Star Trek and Mobile Suit Gundam came up quite a few times, because in Japan, Mobile Suit Gundam kind of has that same mythos as Star Trek. It is a long-running, culturally significant sci-fi franchise over there, and they're in space, there are military uniforms. Star Trek does not have giant robots, but I've said many times in my head that if I were to do exactly as you're describing, it would be Star Trek and Gundam for sure. This has crossed my mind.
That is fantastic, and I think you should do it. And second thing is, we will put those pictures up on the show notes page for this episode, which will be in your podcast player. If it supports it, you should be able to link right there and take a look at those glorious pictures of David. But a more practical question, David. It was early on, so where'd you get the uniform from?
I actually got it from Wish. Make all the jokes you want about Wish, everybody, but they do pretty good work for cosplay, believe it or not. Their cosplay stuff is pretty good. Yeah. And with my $23.99 Picard uniform too. It was so far so good.
Okay, great. Well, I wanted to ask, because sometimes I see people asking on Twitter for locations of where to get sort of less expensive cosplay stuff. So if you felt like it was worth it, let's give it a plug.
Yeah.
So David, it's not a secret that you are a podcaster. You've already made reference to the fact,
several references.
That you do a Star Trek podcast that you started called Promenade Merchants with our wonderful friend Heather. What induced you to decide to start podcasting about Star Trek? What does it do for you to talk about it and have your own show? I mean, there's a million shows out there, so what's going on?
Podcasting is my creative outlet, period. Some people write, some people blog. I make podcasts. I make podcasts about things that interest me, and most importantly, I like having conversations with people. I love just hanging out and talking about stuff. It's really that simple. And that's really what it did for me. And given that my Trekkie fandom is reborn now in the current era, I knew that eventually I would do a Star Trek podcast. It was inevitable because this has been a part of my entire life, and it was bound to happen. And the biggest thing for me with everything that I make podcasts on is that I want to do them and collaborate with someone with different viewpoints than me, someone with a different life than my own, someone with a different perspective than my own. And when I asked Heather, she said yes, and I was overjoyed because I felt like she was the right person for it. And
so did you know each other in person, or was this strictly something online and you just approached them?
Just online. We were just Twitter friends for a while. Trek, anime, wrestling, cosplay, all of the things that we mutually share. And I have bandied about publicly a few times that even with all of the other podcasts that I do, I was really getting an itch to do a Star Trek podcast. And I was saying that if I were to do a podcast about Star Trek, I wanted to be with a woman. Mm-hmm. It was important to me to do a podcast with a woman. And given that Star Trek fandom has always been filled with women, always.
Yep.
It felt like it just felt natural, and asking Heather felt like a natural choice. And when she said yes, it was a natural fit. And we're a few episodes in now. I like to call us we're the cool, scrappy underdogs of Star Trek podcasts, and I think we're going okay so far. I'm liking it.
Promenade Merchants is a great podcast, and I would recommend everyone should subscribe to it and listen to it. Skip the one that I'm in because it's a tire fire, and no one should listen to any podcast that I'm on. So skip that episode, but listen to all the rest. They're great, and I especially like the ones where you all confessed your love for motion picture, which I have a soft spot for in my heart, and I really enjoyed that podcast.
I was really surprised at how many people really disliked it. Like, yes, it's a little slow, but is it really that bad?
I think one of the things you have to think about is how motion pictures were made and what they were going for with that particular film. So as an example, my darling wife, who is not on any social media and is untaggable and will never listen to this.
God bless her.
She wouldn't mind me talking about this, but she decided that she was going to watch the AFI Top 100 film list. And she does not like most of those films. She likes romantic comedies, right? I mean, just basic romantic comedy she likes. If it's not a quote unquote cute movie, she tends not to like it. But she has been a trooper and has been watching, Spartacus, which she couldn't stand, and Citizen Kane. She's like, what is this, right? Well, the other night, we were going to bed, and 2001: A Space Odyssey was the film she had to watch.
Oof.
There's a 15-minute light show at the end of that film. It's 15 minutes long of just lights and like his eyeballs until they end up at the weird in the weird apartment scene at the end. But it's 15 minutes of light. And you look at that and you think they were kind of going for this cinematic sort of feeling that movie had, and it had a real influence on what they were doing in motion picture. And they've even talked about that. So when you look at that and then you're like, oh, there's 6 minutes of looking at the Enterprise, man, I will replay that 6 minutes of looking at the Enterprise like 5 times in a row and not feel anything bad about it. So I'll defend the motion picture.
Once or twice.
I'll defend it, the motion picture against all comers. So feel free to have at me on Twitter, people, if you're out there. But I do want to give you a chance. Just run down for us, David. What are your other podcasts that you're currently producing?
Oh, well, you're too kind. I will say that I produce and edit Sports Odds and Ends with my friends Brandon Cooper, King Kaz, and JVZ Jerry Vin, where they do a sports show for the fly-by-night sports fan. I play the role of the producer behind the glass as they talk about the world of sports of the day that might have fallen through the cracks. Now that sports seem to be back, essentially, we did stop for a while because of the whole virus thing, but sports are back, and we're back underway. Also, there is Record Breakers, where I'm on a podcast that is sort of a musical book club, where the rotation of us going an album at a time per episode. If you listen, you might hear my interest in progressive rock, you might hear my interest in hip-hop, you might hear my interest in metal, vaporwave and future funk. I'm really hard to pin down when it comes to picking albums for Record Breakers. So
it's one question on that. So it's all genres?
It's all genres.
Okay.
And we all do an album at a time for all of us. There's 4 of us.
I have a coworker who is absolutely addicted to K-pop. And
so that's Petey. He's our main guy. He's the host.
I know nothing about K-pop, but he would send me links to YouTube videos. And he sent me one just the other day. He sent me like a list of like 3 different YouTube videos to watch for some K-pop group called Blackpink. And I'm not saying I watched them all, but I'm not saying I didn't either. So I'll just leave that there before we go down a rabbit hole.
I think Petey, my good brother, Petey Rave, my longtime podcast collaborator, I think the only time me and him really got heat with one another was on an episode of Record Breakers where he brought, I believe it was the juggernaut BTS, and where I said that I enjoyed it, but it was an entire album's worth of K-pop. And then I said at the end, while I enjoyed myself, I'm good with K-pop for a little while. I'm good.
Very good. So you've got Promenade Merchants, Record Breakers, Sports Odds and Ends. Any others that we should mention?
And the recently retired anime podcast of some sort. If I were a musician, that probably would have been my main number one project for quite a few years. It was the podcast where myself and my buddy Jack McAllister talked about anime, animation, and everything in the anime fan culture space. We recently retired that podcast. We're kind of rethinking and reshaping it. We'll be back again soon to do something together. But anime podcast of some sort is comfortably Gold Watch retired.
So I have a request of you, David. One of the things I'll be interested to hear you talk about, as we have these 2 new animated shows coming out, I'll be curious for your perspective once we see the episodes of the Nickelodeon show and Lower Decks, if you feel that, if at all, sort of the giant corpus of anime has any influence on what they're doing. I mean, we've seen some of the visual styles in Lower Decks, and obviously it's not in the anime style, but I'll be curious to see what you think about that and if there's been any influence that you can discern. So please weigh in on that on Twitter and let us know.
I'll definitely keep that in mind. I'm especially interested in that regarding Star Trek Prodigy. I'm strangely super excited for Star Trek Prodigy. Something about the news and the announcement about Star Trek Prodigy really just hit all of my buttons. I am a 90s kid. I'm kind of a dork when it comes to all things 90s Nickelodeon. I'm kind of a dork that way. And it reminded me, the outline of Star Trek Prodigy reminded me of a Nickelodeon show from the 90s called Space Cases. For the really diehard Nickelodeon fans, you probably remember that show. It starred Walter Jones, who was the original Black Power Ranger on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It was kids in a spaceship. And they had one officer who I believe was called a Star Dog. He was the commander of the ship, but it was mostly kids. Also, they had an android. They had an android named Thelma. And yeah, does that sound slightly familiar, everybody? And yeah, I was into it. So it hit all of those buttons for me. So I'm really excited for Star Trek Prodigy, and I love the idea that there is going to be a Star Trek show for sorry, John, the next generation.
I don't feel bad at all. And not to turn the mirror back on myself, but
that was a pun.
But no, it's okay. But one of the superpowers I feel like I have that enables me to do this show is that I feel absolutely no compunction whatsoever about making people agree with me on anything. I've never felt like
hell no.
I feel like, you have to like the episode that I like, or I have to like the episode you like. It doesn't matter to me. I think it's great.
I just said a slightly PG-13 word. Is that okay?
That's all right. If I need to bleep it, I'll bleep it, man. But we are all good.
All right.
See, we have the same haircut, so I feel like we're simpatico like that. So we're all good here.
We're rocking the Cisco.
Yeah, we are. But I feel like it's time to talk about some episodes. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. I have had the M5 run an intelligence profile and do a little bit of gentle internet sleuthing on you, David.
Are you Tal Shiar?
I might be Section 31. I might be Tal Shiar. I might be some whole nother level going on here, my man. So let's start with Voyager. Let's just jump right in and talk about something really substantial. I feel like we're ready there. We're done with the light and chatty part. I think we really need to hit it. So let's talk about Extreme Risk, Season 5, Episode 3. This is a very strong Torres episode with the infamous banana pancakes, with the diving in the holodeck, and also the construction of the Delta Flyer as a major project that's going on board the ship. What is it about this episode that made the M5 suggest it for us, David? What's going on here, and why is it important to you?
This episode is important to me because I have a certain amount of connection with B'Elanna Torres as a character. In many ways, I relate to her as being someone who is a bit emotionally volatile. It's hard for her to fit in times because while she is Federation, she's also Maquis, and she's also Klingon. And there's a lot of internal conflict going on with her. And you see a lot of that in that episode. And you see B'Elanna working through some emotional things in some not so healthy ways. And that was like tailor-made prime example of learning how to deal with mental illness. And when I saw what she was doing on the holodeck, it felt very close to home for me in a lot of ways because I've dealt with mental illness. I was diagnosed with depression in 2006, and I've had some really bad episodes in my life, and that really struck a chord with me. And I've said, especially recently, because I've recently been going back to Star Trek Voyager, there is a lot about B'Elanna that I really connect with emotionally. And I remember reading something about Roxanne Dawson really wanting that episode to feel really authentic, and I think she really nailed it. It felt really close to home as someone, and there was a great line of dialogue when she was talking with Chakotay in a scene for this episode where she said she's not feeling anything and she needs to feel something. And sometimes when you're going through a depressive episode, it's not even that you're sad. It's just that you're so mentally spent that you're completely numb and you need to do things that might be a little self-destructive just to feel something. And like B'Elanna said, it's a way to make sure that you're still alive. And that's what it feels like sometimes. And also, I love pancakes too. That was genuinely real too. How at the end of the episode she had the replicator make her some banana pancakes, and that was very true to life as well.
So it sounds to me like the episode actually reflected something in your own life that you identified with, and that's what made it special to you.
Very much so, very much so. And it really cemented B'Elanna Torres as a very strong character that I can connect to in Star Trek.
I think that Torres is one of the underrated characters of Voyager. And it's not to say that she's dismissed, but I just don't think she ever gets quite the same credit that I think some of the others do. I mean, Janeway gets a lot of love. Seven gets a lot of love. And I feel like Torres never quite gets the same amount of love. And I felt like she was a fantastic character as well. And I'm really glad that you picked it, because I love talking about that particular episode and all the Torres episodes, like Faces, Extreme Risk, whichever one it is, A Barge of the Dead. All of those are just spectacular, and it's just always a thrill for me when a Torres episode would come up, because I just did that Voyager rewatch, so I really felt it. And I think that one of the things that I think makes Star Trek really great is when, to borrow a phrase from another franchise, when it's ripped from the headlines. And so you have this wonderful sort of symmetry that there was this cutting phenomena that still exists, unfortunately, today, especially with young girls. And this was a way to sort of show some of that in Star Trek, too, and to give it sort of that sci-fi spin, and people can watch it and take something from it. And put it into their own life. And that just makes it a glorious...
Exactly right.
Glorious episode, yeah. Also notable, too, for the use of CGI when they were doing the flyer. If you just look at that in the episode, you realize, oh, gosh, they never could have done this in the old Star Trek with the old technology, right? They really had to have the CGI, add the fins, take off the fins, make it bigger, make it smaller. It was just a remarkable episode on so many fronts. So... really, really good one to start us off. But I want to move into a more modern Trek. Let's slingshot around the sun and jump into the 21st century, and let's talk about Discovery New Eden, Season 2, Episode 2. This is the one, of course, where Pike and Oosakun and Burnham go down to New Eden. It was a Terralisium. Was that the planet?
Terralisium, yes.
Yep, Terralisium. And they discover that these humans have been living there, and they sort of have this conglomeration religion that they've pieced together. We have Jacob, who's searching for the truth. What is it about this episode that speaks to you, David?
Not to get too on the nose with what everyone else says, I think this was just a generally great episode of television. You had a clear motivation, you had some action, you had some suspense, and you had a really good story. And I think that the writers did a really great job with Christopher Pike and Michael Burnham doing that balance between faith and science and realistic thinking and critical thinking and faith. And they gave Christopher Pike some really great depth, talking about how his father, while being a scientist, also had an interest in theology. So you saw how he gave credence to both faith and critical thinking, and it allowed Michael to open her mind a little bit. Also, seeing Lieutenant Oosakun having a bit of a prominent spot in an episode, that was really good. Hopefully in season 3 we see more of the bridge crew. I think that's if there's one thing that I will say is a valid criticism of Star Trek Discovery, it's that I think it's time to start expanding the bridge crew a little more. And they did that with this episode, not just with Owo, but also with Kayla Detmer being at the helm as a pilot, doing a donut in space. I think that was the episode. I think it was.
Yep, it was.
And we got to see more of the bridge crew. You saw Bryce, you saw Reese, you saw Detmer, you saw Oosakun, and they were beginning to be more fleshed out characters. Also, on top of that, Terralisium, that planet and their whole story, that was straight out of the original series. That could have been a TOS episode. It was kind of perfect. And I just think generally it was just a great episode of television from start to finish. Actually, one thing I did with Jack, I said to him that if there's something from Star Trek Discovery that I would love for you to watch, it's that episode. And Jack came back to me and he said, I totally get what you're about now. That's what he said. Like, I totally get it. And there you go. That was one that... If I were to introduce Star Trek to someone right now, that would probably be an episode that I'd use.
Completely agree with you on that. One of the things I thought was interesting, and I want to echo what you said, was that they were using this as an opportunity to give us some background on Owasekin, and I was really pleased that she got featured in the episode and had some things to do besides just sitting at the panel and looking concerned or whatever. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was they talked about the fact that she was raised by Luddites, people who rejected sort of modern conveniences, basically like, Star Trek Amish, if I could, put sort of a shorthand on it. And one of the things I really liked about that, even though I didn't spend a lot of time on it, is that in all Star Trek, especially when you go back to TOS, when we're told that like the Federation is so wonderful and such a great place to live, you have to sort of explain, like, why are there all these people who are having these lives that they choose to leave behind and go colonize these other worlds that don't look so great? So if you go look at like, TOS, the Paradise Syndrome, I mean, they're living on like a ranch, with very primitive technology and not really using all the latest stuff. And you think like, why would they choose to do that?
That was Chakotay's whole character arc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I liked how they gave that background that we normally see outside the ship. It's not normally our quote unquote characters, right? It's usually the guest of the week that's sort of having that, we came out here to do our own thing, go away, Federation. We don't want to listen to you, right? And here we're getting, no, I was in that group and I know all about that, So I just thought that was a really good move. And I really want to see more of that. In fact, I want to divert for a second to hit you with something and see what you think about it. One of the things I really appreciate about the first season of Picard is that we're actually getting more of the Federation as it actually is, as opposed to through the lens of our Starfleet officers for the very first time. And that's one of the things I really, really liked about Picard, is that you're seeing, sort of like regular people in the Federation as
seeing Earth.
Yeah, Earth and the Federation as they're actually living normal lives. And not as part of, sort of this quasi-military organization, which is sort of how the lens through which we see everything. And I'm really appreciating that. I'm wondering how you feel about it.
I love that we're seeing Earth in the 24th century. I love that. I would love to see other parts of the Federation. I loved that we saw Will Riker and Deanna Troi on the planet Nepenthe. And I love that we're expanding more of this universe that we all love, but we still only know a little bit about. And that's what I would love to see more of. As much as I love Star Trek, Starfleet officers discovering the mysteries of space, I've grown attached to this universe and this franchise so much that I would love to look at a little bit more of the nuance. And that's part of why so much of what I talk about is DS9 influenced, is that I love that Star Trek is willing to look at itself and examine itself, good and bad. And I'm totally okay with that.
Well, then I think we should talk about a Deep Space Nine episode. Let's talk about...
You're welcome, John.
Yes, of course. I appreciate the segue whenever you make it. So let's talk about Deep Space Nine, Inter Arma blah blah Latin stuff. That's what I call it. Season 7, episode 16. We have an episode that has a lot of political intrigue here. We've got Romulans. We've got Section 31. We've got the wonderful guest star John Fleck, who shows up in a lot of Star Trek in a lot of different roles. I'm watching him now in Enterprise, season 1, 2. So really a really great episode that shows up on a lot of lists, but I'm curious, what about it spoke to you?
First and foremost, that big, ugly, deep, dark secret. Come here, John. Come here.
Oh, I'm listening.
The Federation isn't perfect.
A lot of my listeners are probably rolling over in their graves right now because their love of Star Trek might be based on that. So you're going to have to say why you think that that's a particularly controversial statement.
Because it's exactly as you described. And it was a cold shot of reality for Dr. Bashir in this episode, that he saw that not just Section 31, but a Starfleet admiral will occasionally bend and break the rules for the greater good. We saw that more than a couple of times in Deep Space Nine. As Benjamin Sisko once said, it's easy to be a saint in paradise. And as we know, the Dominion War, Deep Space Nine, it wasn't exactly Earth in the 21st century. It was a little rougher. It was a little harder. It was a little bit more cowboy. And yeah, a Romulan senator that was an ally of the Federation lost her career, might have lost her life. There was some spy dealings going on, but you know what? Sometimes these things happen. Every major power has some sort of intelligence going on. That's no different anywhere. But that doesn't make them, quote unquote, evil. It just sometimes, and Captain Lorca said this in season 1 of Discovery, sometimes the ends do justify terrible means. And despite Admiral Ross kind of saying this conversation never happened when him and Bashir were off the record, he knew the truth. And he, like Captain Sisko with the Romulans, has to live with the truth, that ugly, ugly truth that sometimes when there is an existential threat, a giant existential threat, sometimes you have to pull a few extra strings. And is that okay? Well, I guess that's up to you.
Have you ever read the novel Control by David Mack?
I have not.
We talked about it on the show before, I believe in my episode with Alex Perry. And one of the things that the book takes on is this idea that how could the Federation actually exist in a world of imperfect people? And that's really at the heart of the book. And the whole idea is that at the heart of Section 1, there's an iron-fisted AI that is sort of running the Federation. And not that anyone knows about it, it's a secret, but it's actually out there sort of enforcing the Federation holding together and doing some real incredibly sneaky stuff. And it sort of perverts the whole idea of what the Federation is. You know, so if that's the sort of thing you like, that's the sort of thing you might like. So if you want to check out a Star Trek book, I'd recommend it to you. It's dark, though, man. Really dark.
I'll just say the Federation is not perfect, but they're not the Terrans.
Exactly. There's room for nuance in the world, right? And when you set up sort of the Federation as like the all-purpose, all good, you know, all singing, all dancing, all, you know, electric version of perfect humanity, it sort of makes it really hard to tell some interesting stories. And so one of the things I think Deep Space Nine was particularly good at was getting away from that, right? And sort of showing you sort of the scary underbelly of all the shenanigans that have to go on to keep this thing running. So I think
sometimes that glass of root beer will have a little bit of Saurian brandy, if you know what I mean.
Man, wasn't Quark just completely right about that?
He really was. He really, really was.
I've never looked at root beer the same way ever again. Right. I think let's move Deep Space Nine and the Federation off for a second. Let's talk about the Klingons. Let's talk about TNG. Let's talk about Redemption. Season 4, episode 26. This is an episode where we're dealing with Gowron. We're dealing with internal Klingon politics. Worf ends up resigning his commission. At the end of it, we have that wonderful, wonderful scene in the phaser range with Guinan and Worf standing sort of back to back. It's wonderfully shot and executed. I'm a really big fan of that whole sequence. Why are we talking about Redemption, David? What about this one is particularly interesting to you?
I just think that there is so much on this episode and throughout the entire saga of the rise of Gowron and the Duras sisters and Worf and his brother and the House of Moog. And they fit so much of that into this episode. And so much about the Klingons is this romantic samurai Viking opera drama. And it's so enthralling to see the Klingons in their own environment. I find them just endlessly entertaining and endlessly fascinating. And Worf being at the center of all of this, showing real multiple dimensions, as an older brother, as the head of a family, as a Federation officer, as a Klingon, and having to go through so many of these things. And the cameo from Denise Crosby as Tasha Yar's daughter. And there's so much storytelling in this episode. There's so much lore, for the lack of a better term, that if you are a Star Trek fan, this episode just has so much for you. It has Gowron at his full Gowron. It has the Duras sisters. It's just fantastic television. And it is not just fantastic television, it is fantastic Star Trek.
I think I want to put that down in the show notes as David on, quote-unquote, the full Gowron.
Yes, with the eyes. You can't forget the eyes.
We're going to go full Gowron up in here, yo. So it sounds like you were not one of the Star Trek fans that had a particular challenge in synthesizing sort of what we saw of the Klingons in TNG and Deep Space Nine with what we saw in Discovery. And I'm not talking about costume or makeup changes, but I'm talking about sort of the cultural stuff and sort of the feelings of what it was like to be a Klingon and sort of what we knew of their society and culture. Some fans seem to have a particular challenge with that, but it doesn't sound like you did.
Not at all. Not at all. I think at the core of what makes a Klingon is nationalism. I guess, what would you say for a planet? Planetism, I guess. And just having pride in who you are. To talk about Discovery, I absolutely loved T'Kuvma as a character. I thought he was incredibly compelling. I thought he would have been a great long-term villain for Star Trek Discovery. And I thought that he was maybe a bit dour, but at the same time, so was Worf for many, many years. He was very stoic, and so was T'Kuvma. But at the same time, he was charismatic, he was compelling, and he believed in his cause. He, in his own twisted way, was a man of Klingon honor to his core. And I think that reflected in the House of T'Kuvma and how he united the 24 houses under him. I think that really showed that these Klingons are Klingons, even if you don't like what they look like. They are Klingon. And they remained Klingon.
Klingon Mach Tak Judge. So there you go. So it's interesting that you bring that up. I haven't heard sort of a full-throated defense of T'Kuvma on the show. That was for you, Trek geeks. I know you listen. So that's interesting that you bring that up. So let me see. Let's explore that a little bit. So T'Kuvma's premise right up front in the beginning of the show is that the Federation is sort of insidious, and not that they're going to come in here with weapons and guns and try to kill us, but they're going to surround our space and influence our culture so that we'll be less Klingon, and all the things that we are will be lessened if we don't oppose them. That's my sort of encapsulation of his philosophy. Do you think I have that right?
I think you nailed it.
Do you think that he was right?
I think that he probably had some merit, because I think you can look at Deep Space Nine and how the question of Bajor entering the Federation was something that came up several times, even to a point where Captain Sisko said that they couldn't join the Federation right away. And I think the Federation does kind of have a way of incorporating other cultures into their own, while also kind of being Earth-centric and Earth-focused. But at the same time, this is a TV show that revolves around humans from Earth traveling through space. So that's just going to happen with a TV show about humans from Earth.
One of the things we haven't... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, T'Kuvma really didn't like that.
One of the things we haven't talked about on the show for a really long time is that one of the reasons I think the Borg were so compelling is that the Federation, in their own way, are a kind of Borg. They go around and assimilate other cultures into their Federation society. And from what we see of Federation society, and I'm going to put Picard to the side for a minute, but especially previously, it seems that Federation society, I'm not talking about humans, because we always have those humans who sort of want to go off and do their own thing, but it seems that Federation society is quite milquetoast in a lot of ways. It doesn't really have a lot of dynamism and a lot of wild diversity of living and sort of crazy stuff happening. It seems sort of sedate and kind of
This is something that I've always said, and when I saw season 1 of Discovery, I had an epiphany. If you remember in the season 1 finale of Discovery, they went to the Klingon homeworld, Kronos. And when I saw Kronos, I said, that's where I want to go on my shore leave. Because all my life, I've always said, Risa looks kind of boring. And Risa is like the main Federation vacation spot. It's like the Tahiti of the Federation. I don't know, Tahiti, Maui, wherever people go.
The Sandals Beach Resort of the Federation.
Yeah, and I would see it, and I'm just like, it's kind of dull. It looks kind of dull. But then when I saw Kronos, like, yeah, that looks more my speed. I'm kind of up for a party in that way. It's why I go to so many conventions. I'm kind of up for a party.
You want a rough and tumble vacation, right? That's a little rough around the edges. All right.
Yeah.
Then, all right, let's...
maybe an Orion Slave Girl 3.
Oh, dear. Well, I think we just learned something about you, David. All right. Well, then let's go ahead and talk about a Voyager episode, another Voyager episode. Let's talk about Gravity. This is the one where they get stranded on the planet in the shuttlecraft, and we have Tuvok, who ends up having sort of a little bit of a Lerv connection with Nos, the guest star of the week, who's on the planet. And we have the flashbacks to Tuvok as a young man with some of his trials and tribulations with adopting to the Vulcan discipline of logic. And of course, no mention of the episode can go out without referring to the great Joe Ruskin, who was in so many episodes of the Star Trek, doing a fantastic job every time. This was season 5, episode 13. What is it in particular in this episode that draws you to it?
I loved that we really got to examine Tuvok, and he is a full Vulcan. And I love that we got to see that despite his very devout Vulcan upbringing and training, he showed more depth in this episode than I think in the entire series. And I think he was well past due for an episode like this. And it also showed that he is not afraid to show some emotion when he feels the time is right. And I think that was really important with him and Nos. He clearly understood and acknowledged that they had a connection to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, he was married and had a family waiting for him back in the Alpha Quadrant. But he understood and acknowledged, and I think even to a certain degree, appreciated Nos back to a degree. I think that the episode ending with Tuvok giving Nos the live long and prosper was a great moment. It was very sentimental, and it was really heartfelt. And I think that when you see Vulcan characters have those moments, it's something to really appreciate. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, in Discovery, when Captain Pike and Spock meet for the first time after Spock's been away, Spock cracks a little bit of a joke, and Pike says, "Is that a smile on your face?" And Spock says, yes, it is. And you see the fact that Spock has that sort of deep affection for Captain Pike, and that's important. It's important to recognize when Vulcans do show a tiny bit of emotion.
whenever I see Vulcans struggling with this in any of the shows, in any of the incarnations of Star Trek, I always have this weird sort of analogy in my head of like a person, like if you've ever heard of the story of the Sword of Damocles, right? Where this person is sitting at a table and they're enjoying this feast while a sword is suspended over their head by a thread, right? That's the Sword of Damocles. And the whole idea is like logic is that little thread that's holding the sword. And if they tug at it too much, it's going to unleash that sword. And sort of the whole conflict of being a Vulcan is whether or not to touch the thread, how much to touch the thread, whether or not you should touch the thread, because if that thing lets loose, they're going to go into this wild chasm of emotional ferocity. That we're always told that Vulcans have these incredibly deep, wild, and somewhat erratic emotions, and they can't control them. So if that sword ever comes loose, you don't know what you're going to get, right? You're going to get something worse than Vulcans at the worst of the Ponfar, I would imagine.
We saw that with T'Pol a few times in Enterprise.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's I have to struggle to remember that because the last time I saw some of these Enterprise episodes was an original broadcast, but she definitely does struggle with it. And I was just rewatching some of the Vulcan arc episodes from the last season, and I think you see that, right? And sort of as a society, they were deciding whether or not they wanted to touch that thread. And how far to take it, right? Which seems to be sort of a preeminent question in Vulcan society, right? Which is how much of this can we allow as a society without really going over that line and losing sort of the progress that we've made in discipline and logic. So I really enjoy that tension in those Vulcan characters when we see it. But I just got to say, since I just reference Enterprise here, I can't wait until the Vulcans freaking calm down a little bit. Because in those first seasons, man, it is rough. It is rough.
They are almost, they're pretty close to insufferable.
Yeah, pretty much. So talking about insufferable, let's talk about TNG's Frame of Mind. Season 6, episode 21. Here's the case where we have the stage play. Riker is suffering and really going through some insufferable situations as he's losing his mind and he's not sure where he is and what's happening to him. Why is this particular episode on the list, David? What's going on?
Two things. One, I just think that Jonathan Frakes was just on fire throughout this entire episode. Just a brilliant performance by Jonathan Frakes. For a guy that calls himself a director, he's a pretty good actor when he wants to be. I think also that you see what it feels like when you don't think that you're losing your grip on reality, but everyone else is saying that you are. And I think I would hope that not everyone has gone through those points, but I know I have. I know what it feels like to have the feeling that everyone else is telling you you're crazy when you're really not. You're just having a really bad day, and you just need to get away from all of the things that are stressing you out. And at the end, he found a way to really conquer the demons of what was going on in his head when he was captured and destroy the set. And I think that was a great bit of symbolism of finding a way to work out your internal struggles.
It's probably one of the most, how do I want to describe this? I think actor-focused episodes of Star Trek in a lot of ways, especially TNG, where you really showcase sort of the acting talents of the actor doing like pure thespian work in a lot of ways, because sometimes they're reacting to things that aren't even there. You know, they're looking at a tennis ball and they're like, here's the monster, you know, and it's, or they're doing these sort of two shots with the view screen and, you know, there's some production assistant reading the lines. But here you got a real sense that, you know, Frakes got to work and sort of do a lot of that hardcore thespian acting, you know, yeah. You know, it's funny. I just as we record this, finished watching the Galaxy Quest documentary. I don't know if you had a chance to ever see that.
Once, yes.
And there's this great line when Tim Allen was on the set and he had to do that really heartfelt. Not heartfelt, it's the wrong scene, but the wrong word. It's the wrong word. But he really had to do that emotional scene where he tells Balthazar that the whole thing is made up. He's an actor. He's not really a captain and all of this. And after the scene wrapped, he goes to the director and he's like, look, man, I'm having all these feelings. I need to go back to my trailer and sort of just have a minute. And the director's like, yeah, sure, go. And Alan Rickman turns around and he goes, I think Tim has experienced acting. Which I just thought was glorious. So, by the way, any listeners out there, if you have not seen the Galaxy Quest documentary, I highly, highly recommend it because it is about you.
The Galaxy Quest documentary is also Star Trek.
Yes, it is one of the best Star Trek films, without question. So you should see it. And if you haven't seen it, go see it, and then go watch the documentary. I believe it's on Amazon Prime here in the United States. So go check that out. All right, let's move on to Deep Space Nine, Sacrifice of Angels, Season 6, Episode 6. This episode is notable, I think, for two things. I'll be curious to see if you have a different interpretation. First is the death of Zial at the hands of Damar, whom you said you loved. So you're going to have to explain that to me because he just killed Zial, who's awesome. And also the giant space battles, which were entirely CG, by the way, which was also something that was not that common in Star Trek at this time. So what's going on here, David? Why is this episode special to you?
I really love this two-parter, Fate of the Bold and Sacrifice of Angels, because for me, it really was just putting everything that was Star Trek Deep Space Nine to its climax and really bringing it all together. It was the Federation looking for a way to turn the war in their favor. Captain Sisko was ready to take back Deep Space Nine. The Dominion was ready to really submit their final victory in the Alpha Quadrant, and it was all coming down to this. It felt important. It felt like the most important Star Trek episode. It just felt like so much had come down to this. And Star Trek had never really done anything like that, except I guess you could make the case for First Contact. And there's so much talk about how a lot of modern Star Trek always feels like there's something that's threatening the entire galaxy and it can become overkill. I feel like here with this two-parter, Favor the Bold and Sacrifice of Angels, this really nailed it, where you really felt like this entire franchise had really come to a head and this mattered. And all of the characters in DS9, this fantastic giant ensemble cast, played an important role in this two-parter, and it all meant something, and it mattered, and it was great storytelling from start to finish. Captain Sisko was the conquering hero, Gul Dukat was the fallen villain, the Dominion had been knocked away, we saw Sisko return to the station, the Federation were the conquering heroes of the war, and it was just a great piece of storytelling in a two-parter that Star Trek really hadn't done before. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it had this big triumphant finish that was just absolutely spectacular. Now, when it comes to Damar, he did kill Zial. Yes, he did. I love the Damar story arc, maybe more than any character in not just Star Trek, but maybe all of science fiction. Here we have a guy who was really just a background character who became Gul Dukat's right-hand man, who in many ways was even more of a brutal nationalist dark character than Dukat in many ways. And once the Dominion came in and overtook Cardassia, it really took a toll on him. He realized that, hey, strong-arming people and lording over people isn't always the right thing to do. And then he started realizing what he did and what is happening to his world, and it put him in a really dark place. And he ended up developing a bit of a drinking problem because of it, and that is super true to life, and credit to DS9 for doing something like that. for taking something that is so true to life, where everything in your life is kind of falling apart, and everything you thought you knew and you thought you believed really rocks you to your core, and you have to find some kind of solace. And sometimes some people find that solace in a bottle of alcohol. And Damar pulling himself up from the ditch and giving Wei-Yun the business and becoming a rebel against the Dominion and leading the Cardassian rebellion at the end of DS9 to stop the Dominion and at least end the war. It cost Cardassia a lot, but I think that I won't say he redeemed himself. I won't go that far, but I will say he definitely had a major turnaround. And I love a character arc of someone that pulls themselves from the bottom and makes their way up.
You know, it's interesting because we do see in the screen that Damar loves his Kanar, and he has to struggle with that. And it's strange because I was recently reminded of how true to life that was, because as we record this, I want to say about 2 months ago, give or take, I could be wrong about that, there was a special, I want to say like 4-part documentary on Ulysses Grant that ran on, might have been History Channel. I could be wrong about that, but it ran on.
To drink too.
Yeah, and one of the things they dealt with in the documentary was talking about how and when it was and what circumstances he picked up the bottle and how he got away from it and how he beat it, of course, but the story stayed around for the rest of his life, right? He was labeled with the idea of being a drunkard his whole life. But even though he had really not been much later in his life, but the label had been used by his enemies to try to knock him down. So, but it certainly struck me as a very true to life story. As I was thinking about Damar, it reminded me of what I was thinking about as far as how people, soldiers especially, when they're sort of disconnected from what they feel is the real thing they should be doing, that they tend to fall into, let's just call it, suboptimal behaviors. And it was real to me, and especially as a veteran, I knew many guys when I was in who also, I saw that firsthand from a lot of guys that I knew. And so that was something that I totally subscribed to, and I'm right there with you on that one. All right. Let's do a Discovery episode. Let's do, if memory serves, Season 2, Episode 8. This is our return to Talos 4. We have Culber on the recovery. We've got a lot of Section 31 stuff with Leland going on here. What were the particular things in this episode that spoke to you, David?
I think that this episode spoke to me personally because we got to see Spock and Burnham, and we got to see their relationship. And I've spoken before about my sister, and a lot of that really struck home because I'm a younger brother. So I get that level of affection one might have for their older sister. I totally get that. And there were, I'm fortunate enough to say that my older sister and I have not had the level of strain and conflict that Spock and Michael had. But I definitely see how Spock really looked up to her and admired her a lot, and how that relationship became strained. And I see Burnham really going out of her way to repair that. And I like that it kind of culminated with a joke, because that's also my sister and I. We have very similar sense of humor in a lot of ways, and it was the say goodbye, Spock, and they got away from Section 31, and I just really got a kick out of it.
So that relationship mirrored you and your own sister, and you saw that relationship in the show, and that's what really made you connect to it.
It wasn't as bad, but yes.
Very good. Very good. Well, David, we've had a pretty long conversation about episodes and about your Star Trek fandom, but I really want to just know, why does Star Trek matter to you? Why are you podcasting about it? Why are you here with me spending 2 hours doing this? What about it is special to you?
Because, for the sake of repeating myself, Star Trek has been a part of my entire life. And I remember, just to talk big picture for a second, I remember seeing a video, I think of San Diego Comic-Con 2019, where New Jersey Senator Cory Booker was at San Diego Comic-Con. And I believe it was either the official Comic-Con YouTube page or the official CBS All Access YouTube page got him on camera to talk a little bit about Star Trek. And he gushed about Star Trek the same way I did. He said that it was his dad that introduced Star Trek to him and introduced this idea of humanity getting past our shortcomings and growing and becoming better than what we are and being able to explore the better parts of ourselves and explore what's out there. And that's what really was important to me. Now, more than anything, as I've said, and this is going to be a bit more internally, it might be a bit self-indulgent.
The whole point of the show is self-indulgence, David. Let's just be right up front about that.
Okay, fair enough. Because I've been through lots of different fandoms over the years, none have been more welcoming and inviting than Star Trek. And I've said many times, I've said two things. As much as I've enjoyed all of the other fandoms I've been into, Star Trek was first. And when Discovery started and my Star Trek fandom was no longer dormant, I said that it felt like coming home. That's what it felt like. It felt like coming home. And the Star Trek community has been so incredibly warm and welcoming. And I'm extremely grateful for that, because with some other fandoms that I've been in, I've had some not so good experiences. I've had some not so good encounters. Some of my own doing, some because sometimes people just don't always go together. And some of my own doing. I as you've probably seen on this podcast already, I can be a bit snippy. I can be a bit snarky. I have a bit of a mouth. And has it gotten me in trouble a few times? Yes, it has. But since starting to do Promenade Merchants, the Star Trek community has been so incredibly welcoming. And I can't be more grateful and more thankful to you, John, to Heather, to everyone that has invited me onto their Star Trek podcasts already, to everyone that has listened to Promenade Merchants, to everyone that has listened to Promenade Merchants or will talk with me about Star Trek on Twitter. I just feel extremely grateful to have been, as I like to say, welcomed back home to Star Trek, and I feel like I've come home.
Well, if I may be presumptuous, we're glad you're here, David.
I really appreciate it.
So, I've enjoyed our conversation, David. But I have a message here from the M5 that we have talked too long. And he's telling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru. The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, David?
I think I've studied up okay. Let's do it.
All right. M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record David's responses.
Working.
Question 1. TOS sudden death, Klingon D7 or Romulan bird of prey?
Bird of prey.
Which of these aliens are freakier, the clicky-clacky ones from Schisms or the explodey chest bugs from Conspiracy?
Chest bugs.
Who's chasing you, Mirror Sulu with his saber or Garth, Lord Garth of Izar?
We'll say Sulu.
Who is the worst Badmiral, Admiral Marcus from Star Trek 2009 or Admiral Cartwright from Star Trek 6?
I liked Cartwright, so I'll say the other one.
Admiral Marcus, very good. Last question. Pick your ride. Aqua Shuttle or new shuttle from Lower Decks with blast shield. It's a blast shield. It goes down, it comes up. Blast shield. Ow.
I'll take the first one because I would be the one saying, no, stop it, stop it, stop it.
Aqua Shuttle, very good. Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing.
I think this is the first and only time I have done performance art during the Kobayashi Maru, so that's very special for you, David.
Acting!
I should have taken a screenshot right there as you did that because you emoted really well and you had the fists up and in the air. It was glorious. All right. David, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, sir.
Yes.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
David Majors is awarded the title of Special Federation Envoy to Cardassia Prime.
So there you
Hey, I'll take it.
David, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation.
Well, if people are so inclined, you can follow me on Twitter at CallMeDJM. It's my initials. Call me DJM. Also, if you would like, you can listen to my plethora of podcasts. Promenade Merchants, Sports Odds and Ends, Record Breakers, anime podcasts of some sort, still in your feeds. And you can do so on my website, DeltaJulietMike.com. That's DeltaJuliet.com. You spell out the whole thing. And available in your pod feeder and podcatcher of choice. Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, the whole 9 yards.
David, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
John, thank you so much for having me. It is truly a pleasure.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast, and before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your well wishes for the podcast, your earnest pleas to banish this show to the farthest reaches of the void, or your selfie videos of yourself twerking while wearing a Spock helmet to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be spontaneously combusted like dilithium in the burr. This time, I leave you with a quote from Mavic, who in the episode Frame of Mind said, quote, "I hope you're hungry. They're serving spiny lobefish today." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
It's it's funny because I've been work from home for a long time. It's just that we have an office, and I have an office there, and I would go maybe twice a week into the office, but I would only go when my I had to pick up the kid from carpool. So if I wasn't driving carpool, I never went to the office, but he's not in school, so now I never need to go to the office.
I was sent home for a little while, and it kind of drove me crazy. I hated it. And they needed essential IT staff, and I just begged, like, I can't stand this. Because it had gotten to be like a month where I had left the house and was just like, ugh.
I used to work for a company that had a lot of call centers, and we worked a lot with the agents, and there was a lot of demand for cyber agents, people working from home. People like, yeah, I want it. And one of the things we made them do is we put them through a little training program where they had to do what we called a nesting period. And they worked in the office, but in these isolated cubicles where they were totally isolated, and they could only interact with their coworkers through instant message and phone calls, right? So that they could like try it out for no risk. People would go through the nesting protocol, and some people would opt out right after that. And they're like, I don't like it, because they missed talking to their buddies about the whatever was on TV last night, or, the reality TV shows they were watching, or they missed the potlucks and and all that stuff in the break room. And it was amazing to me how many people wanted to opt out after just the nesting period. They couldn't take it. But I'm getting kind of sick of it myself.
Yeah. You got to have somewhere to go, and it makes the work-life balance hard.
All right, man. So, hey, I didn't respond to your tweet today. I saw it, but only because I'm always cagey about talking about episodes in advance. So I never.
I get it.
I never talk about that. So, and that's part of my spiel here, which is I never. You are never to assume what order the episodes are going to come out. So sometimes it's like the next one I record is the next one that comes. Sometimes they sit on my hard drive for 6 months. So,
all right.
There's no rhyme or reason to it except for like production reasons, meaning like sometimes I feel like I want to compare and contrast a couple of guests. So I move them around. And so they're kind of timeless, and I don't do things that are of the moment. We don't usually talk about the latest news. So it's not a big deal.
I'm the same way with most of my podcasts too. I try not to timestamp them.
Okay, fantastic. So just be careful about that. Boom diggity, we're done, my man.
Thank you. That was
fantastic.
Truly a joy. That was a joy.
I was not that I was going to get into it on the show, but I was going to say if on your sports podcast you ever want to talk about the Golden Knights, I'm your guy.
They came up just on the episode we did Sunday because of the Seattle Kraken officially announcing their name. Just because of the idea of, hey, you can't really expect a brand new team to make the Stanley Cup Finals in their first year. That happened.
Oh, that was a thing.
That happened.
No, that was a thing. Yes, absolutely.
That totally happened.
The thing about the Golden Knights that's really important for the city out here, because people know I live in Vegas, is that they started playing 2 weeks after the October shootings.
Yes, they did.
Right. And it was like the lowest point for the city that is in modern memory, right? There was nothing worse than that. And it brought the city together in a way that was really amazing, because
that's what sports does. That's what sports is all about.
But, here's the one thing I'll say is that Vegas, especially, is a transient city. What made the Golden Knights special was that it was an expansion team and not a reload. And it was ours and didn't belong to anything else. And so people grabbed a hold of it with both hands. And it was glorious, because it really did something for the city that nothing else ever did. And as far as I'm concerned, and I know this is controversial, but the Raiders will never have that.
I was just going to ask.
The Raiders will never have that.
No?
They will never have that, because they have their own fan base and they have a reputation, and I'm not expressing an opinion on it, but I'm just saying that they're already set. There was already a thing.
They are an established brand.